Well, but it wasn't my fault. They would not serve me. They were saying I had been overserved, and I was explaining to them that I hadn't been. It's not my
David,
fault.
David, we're on.
What?
David, we're on.
Okay.
Yeah, David. Yeah, we're gonna have to continue this this attorney-client privilege conversation a little bit later. But good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Hoops HD report, coming to you live here on the evening of Monday, January 11th. We are actually part of the College Football Megacast. If your
Yes.
preferred sport is college basketball, you can right now watch the College Football Championship game while listening to us.
Yes, and I would like to say that this is a mega cast. We are coming to you on 3 different channels. Right there is the Chad Sherwood channel, all Chad. Yes. Here's the John Stalika channel, right there, all John. And then here's the David Griggs channel, all me. So all coming at you, 3 different channels tonight.
Yeah, my name is Chad Sherwood. I'm the host. David's already introduced himself. We also have John Stalika with us. The rest of our panels is not off. We'll get to that in a moment. But John, how are you doing there?
Oh, I'm doing okay. You can count on me for the occasional score update. So we've already had Chattanooga win a game earlier tonight. Monmouth was down 12, but they've cut it to 3 against Fairfield on the road. So we'll keep that in mind as the show goes on.
Yeah, John S will be our score guru tonight. He filled us in on all the NFL scores over the weekend as well. Sorry, that was a cheap shot, wasn't it, John? I think he's actually now going back to rewatch the Cincinnati Bengals, yeah. Choking away with all those penalties. But
I was able to meet the Bengals before the team, and I gave them some really good advice on how not to take any crap from the Steelers. I think it paid off.
I was pulling up the halftime speech from Frank Martin, which they should have listened to at the end of the game, but yeah. For some reason they lost their heads.
Our colleagues John Titel and Joey Fortson are not with us tonight. Now, maybe it's because of some other situations going on. Maybe it's because of the college football championship game. Or maybe it's because of the weeks that Arizona and Virginia had this past week. I don't know that 2 teams in the country could have had worse, more devastating weeks than those 2 schools. But let's get right into it there. With Arizona, let's start right there. Titel, I know as you're watching this, you're going to be a little upset that we did this, but last Thursday night...
John, I was going to say, in fairness to John T., if you look at his profile on the front page, he does list himself as an investigator. So I figured we had just dispatched him to Utah to see if he can get the holy war straightened out between Utah and BYU.
Yeah, we're going to get an update on that from him. But the Arizona Wildcats lost the game at UCLA. They were down big most of the game, made a comeback, tied it, then lost it, and then played 3 halves against USC and lost the game. And if that's not bad enough, they're Alonzo Trier, who had been just about their best player the last couple of weeks, is now out 4 to 6 weeks with a hand injury. David, what's Arizona's prognosis right now with what has happened last week?
It's not good, but it's not awful either. UCLA having just the 1 home loss to Monmouth, USC also being a strong home team. So we're not talking about damaging season, cataclysmic style losses. And he's out 4 to 6 weeks, but they will get him back. I think it's one of those things that knocks them. They may not end up on the top 4 lines, but they still even could with that. They come home and play the Washington schools. I don't think they're going to have too much trouble with that. 4 of their next 6 games are at home, and the 4 games that are at home are against teams that have been lousy on the road. So even without them, I still think at worst they go 4-2 in their next 6, and they get them back, and they'll still be fine. Long-term, big picture, I don't think it hurts them that much.
But can they win the Pac-12 now, or somebody else going to be able to take it?
Somebody else will. I mean, it's going to be a lot harder doing that now than it was before.
And John S., if you don't get to those top 4 lines, you end up as a 5 seed, a 6 seed in the NCAA tournament. Doesn't that have that long-term effect? Because now you've got a lot tougher road to a potential, at least a Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final 4 that maybe this Arizona team could have contended for?
Well, if you look at the Pac-12 this year, they've done a lot better in the non-conference than they've typically done. So it's kind of a double-edged sword that they alluded to. There's no elite team in the Pac-12, but there are a lot of NCAA caliber teams, and I think there could be as many as 9 right now that would be, if not in a tournament, at least under some serious consideration.
Well, we want to get back to the Pac-12 again in a bit here. We just want to bring up Arizona and want to mention a few other pieces of news and notes here from out west that came up this week. The second of which is something that we already mentioned at the top of the show already once, but talking about another Pac-12 coach here, Larry Krystkowiak over at Utah, decided to cancel the Holy War. Not even that the series ended and we just weren't able to work something out to renew it, actually canceled the scheduled game for next season against BYU because the rivalry had gotten too intense and was getting dangerous. David, my favorite moment, the very next BYU home game, all the students are wearing safety helmet hats.
Disappointing, and we alluded to it in our at the top of our last broadcast of the bracket show. I know you kind of didn't want to get too much into it since it was a bracket show and not a lot of news and notes, but I can understand not like I can understand the situation with Utah being disappointed in some of the incidents and some of the behavior of fans and players and whatnot, but to just go, this is not the answer. You don't want to run from something like this. If anything, it should be a selling point, and we just don't seem to have the level of intrigue, the level of intensity that college basketball once had. I can't help but think that the classic Big East in its 9-team format, if that were around the day, would the league just disband because it was too intense? What about the Big 8? What about the Southwest? We used to have these great rivalries, and Utah was a conference game for many, many, many years. So it's not like it reached the level of intensity that it wasn't at before. If anything, I think it used to be more intense. I think college basketball has lost a lot of the intensity and the hatred and the rivalries that made the regular season so interesting and so intriguing. And this was a gem. This really was one of the better, more intense, bitter rivalries in the sport, and it's gone now. I'm rambling. You're going to have to go to somebody. I am not happy. I don't know how you all feel about it. I am not happy about it. It is a mistake. It is the wrong thing to do, not just for Utah and BYU, but I think for the sport as a whole.
I couldn't agree with you more, David. I think it is absolutely a crime that you would take a rivalry that's this intense and kill it off like this. Maybe something needs to be done. Maybe it's more security. Maybe even sitting down with BYU and say, hey, listen, maybe we need to play this game in Salt Lake City next year, find a way to cool things off a little bit. But to cancel the games outright because they are too intense, it would be like North Carolina and Duke saying, well, we're not going to play each other anymore in ACC play. We'll just add in an extra games against Clemson and Wake Forest because our rivalry is too intense, and we're afraid that the fans might start fighting with each other. John S., you're the Xavier guy. Cincinnati and Xavier, another perfect example, had the brawl. They didn't cancel the series.
Well, it wasn't just a brawl 4 years ago. There was also an incident in the mid-'90s where Gillen and Huggins refused to shake hands with each other after a contentious rivalry game, but part of that was diffused because Gillen left after the season to take the Providence head coaching job. And then we haven't even mentioned another elephant in the room that's always been one of David's finer talking points, and that's Kansas and Missouri, even though that's not really anger-related, but just more a business move.
Yeah, that's a business move, but this is about I think that's where the parallel is with Cincinnati and Xavier. They thought about going to a neutral site. They did go to a neutral site, I think, for a couple of years, if I'm correct.
For 2 years.
Right. For 2 years, yeah. But they didn't cancel it.
Right. I think it's worth pointing out, Cincinnati and Xavier, the fans don't like each other, but they kind of coexist. I think both sides like the rivalry. Administratively, both athletic departments like the rivalry. BYU, Utah, there is legitimate. I mean, they enjoy the rivalry, but I think that it's different that they really do hate each other. Zach had alluded to it. I don't want to go into the reasons why, but I am not saying – I understand that Utah fans have been really fed up with some of the antics at this game, particularly like with some of the cheap shots and dirty plays and dirty fouls and flagrant fouls. And I am not saying that's okay. I'm not saying that that doesn't need to be addressed, and it should be addressed. What I'm saying is that this is not how you address it. This rivalry goes back to 1907. They've played so many times. It was a conference game for many years, and to just get rid of it is a damn shame.
I'm not the history major here, but is that before or after Utah actually got statehood?
Good question. I think it was after, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. But let's stick out west, though. I want to touch one other major event that happened this week. Just came down over in UNLV, where we have been as critical as anybody, I think, of Dave Rice's coaching job on this show. Praiseworthy of his recruiting. He's absolutely landed some incredible recruits, but has not been able to get these kids to play together. 3 years in a row now, they've had incredible talent and haven't even made the NCAA tournament. Started out 0-3 in conference play, and now Dave Rice has been terminated mid-season. I think the first question, I guess, which is the easier one, is did he deserve to be fired? And the second question is, was doing that mid-season the right way to go? David?
No to the latter, yes to the former. I do think a change needed to be made. What I don't understand is what a mid-season firing accomplishes that waiting until the end of the year doesn't accomplish. I think it's incredibly disruptive. It does not do anything to help salvage a season. It's also not fair to the rest of his staff. I think you end up with an interim coach that's in that seat knowing that the school has no intention of keeping the assistant of the coach they just fired. So you have all this, you just have this discomforting feeling for the rest of the year of uncertainty that could have been avoided had you just, I mean, say you kept him and he lost all the rest of the games. Are you really any worse off than you are by, getting rid of him now? I don't see the point to a mid-season firing if it's merit-based. If it's behavior-based, if it's something else, then yes. But if it's simply because you're not winning, I don't see the point in doing it in the middle of the season.
Yeah, if Georgia had fired Dennis Felton mid-season about, 7 or 8 years ago, I'm not sure they make their Cinderella run in the SEC tournament, even though that was under a very unique set of circumstances.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I'll say is, David, you mentioned the idea that I believe it's Simon or Robbins who took over as the head coach, the assistant here for the rest of the season, that he has no shot at becoming the head coach. I'm not necessarily certain that that's true. This may be a chance for him to audition basically for the rest of the year, especially because my understanding is he was fairly instrumental in a lot of this high-profile recruiting. So I guess the other question here, John S., let me throw this back to you. Do you think any chance that UNLV does rebound and actually become competitive the rest of the year?
Well, in the Mountain West, just about everyone has a chance to be competitive. I mean, Boise State is the only team that really has any odds whatsoever of getting an at-large, but for them to do that, they're going to have to run the bowl. So, I mean, they still, play the Mountain West tournament at Thomas and Mack, so anything is possible in that tournament, as we saw with Wyoming last year.
Yeah.
David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not really, other than that it's the race to the 12 line.
Yeah. But let's go. One other point, John S. I know you wanted to bring this up today, and I'm actually going to read. We actually do an outline before we do these shows, and John has been putting it together for us the last couple of weeks here. I'd like to read John's comment, one of the items of news and notes here, and let him explain to it. But this was his exact comment. Jim Boeheim's 9-game suspension is over. Syracuse is still in deep shit. John, I love that comment.
Yeah, that would have been no doubt inspired by Lee, but when you look at Syracuse, even now that Boeheim is back, they're still 10-7, 0-4 in their conference, including a loss to Clemson at home. Clemson, need I say more?
In basketball, by the way.
Yes, in basketball.
A Clemson team that's now out to a 3-1 start in the ACC. And why don't we just move right into some ACC discussion now? Clemson not only winning at Syracuse, but then picking up the home win over Louisville. David, does this Clemson team actually have something this year?
Potentially. On the court, they're not the best offensive team in the world. They really haven't been ever since Brunell got there. But I mean, if you look at their losses, a close loss to South Carolina, who is unbeaten, a close loss to Alabama, a team they really outplayed, the loss at Minnesota, so they need a waiver. But really, like, the only team that has really blown their doors off was the game at Georgia. Other than that, they were in there for decently competitive against North Carolina. They've won their last 3. They're hosting Duke. It's a huge showcase game for them. It's coming up this Wednesday. With the games not being on campus and being in Springfield, it should be a big deal. Duke is never coming back to Springfield, so hopefully they're able to sell that game. Greenville. Duke is never coming back. Well, they're never going to Springfield either, Chad. I was just making that point that they're Duke. Okay. Anyway,
Duke has a last fair shot to go to Springfield than to go to Greenville. I don't know if they're going to play a game. Is it Furman that's in Greenville also? But
yeah.
Yes, it's Furman. Clemson also beat Florida State, so that would be their 3rd win in the ACC.
Right, yeah. And again, they have 2 heavyweights at home, and I realize you don't get the credit on paper for winning home games. It's not even close. But as far as building momentum and cementing a basketball program that has been completely dormant for the past 5 years, I think winning at home almost does more to energize your fans than I mean, if they get one of the next 2 or even both of the next 2, there's going to be a lot of energy around this program.
Right, the next 2 being home against Duke, home against Miami, and then road against Virginia. So their next 3 are 3 straight, actually including the Louisville game, 4 straight KenPom top 10 teams. So that's a heck of a stretch right now. But David, let me stick with you with another question here on the other end of that Louisville-Clemson game. You have been, for all the years I've known you, your probably biggest factor whether a team belongs and where they belong in the NCAA tournament is what do you do on the road against tournament caliber teams.
Yes.
I've got a Louisville profile up in front of me now that is 1-3 on the road, with the only win being against an NC State team, which is an NIT team, not a tournament team. All their wins have been at home, and even their home wins, the most impressive one is over the Grand Canyon Antelopes.
Well, Wake Forest, they did beat Wake Forest at home.
Okay. Oh, well, Wake, okay.
But to be fair, Wake is 3-1 in true road games, surprisingly. So you give them some credit for that. But Louisville did nothing, absolutely nothing, to make any sort of a case for themselves out of conference. If you want to go with the eye test, yes, they played Michigan State and Kentucky tough in true road games that are very tough to win. But you have to do a little more than that. I mean, you have to do more than almost beat teams. And I think the pressure, for the exact reason you said, is really on them the rest of the way. They took a complete pass out of conference on making any sort of case for themselves, and when you do that, you put the pressure on you in conference. And when you play in a tough conference like this, it's like, why not? You know you're going to have tough games in conference. Why not give yourself a few more chances so you have something to fall back on? And we did a study, I think it was a year or 2 ago, and I think we're going to do it again, of teams that were inside the bubble, like the ones that got at larges, and essentially anybody that wasn't 4 games above 500 in conference play that was inside the bubble had wins against other tournament caliber teams out of conference. Louisville doesn't have any.
I know we're splitting hairs here with Louisville, but they also got a neutral court win against St. Louis and Brooklyn earlier in the year. I know St. Louis is not a sexy name, but if you ask our friends at GW, maybe there is something to that.
I'm not going to give them any credit for beating St. Louis and Brooklyn. I'm sorry, John. I just can't see that. When I look at this Louisville profile, I see a bubble team. And then when I look at their numbers, I see that KenPom has them rated 9th overall in the nation, which what tells me is that because of the pass they took out of conference, this team cannot slip up in conference at all. They have almost no margin for error there, and losing the game at Clemson, that's a pretty bad thing to do. If they had played quality competition, non-conference, I overlook this Clemson loss a lot easier.
Yeah.
But the other team that, well, guess what? A couple other things here, but our colleague Joby Fortson not with us. We talked at the top of the show. Another team that had a very lousy week was the Virginia Cavaliers.
Yeah.
Losing last Monday night while we were on the air with our Hoops HD report at Va Tech, then losing at Georgia Tech. Maybe Brian Gregory's best win ever.
Georgia Tech, at least.
Yeah, John. This Georgia Tech team, are they somebody we're paying attention to now? Just like we discussed with Clemson.
Yeah, we had mentioned Georgia Tech briefly earlier in the year. I think their biggest win prior to this was against VCU at home, and suddenly the Rams are another team that's started to take off in their own conference, but we'll get to them later on.
David, Virginia has coming up tomorrow night, Tuesday night, Miami at home. How big of a game is this going to be, and how important is this? Really important game for Virginia to win now.
I think it's important in the sense that if they want to remain on the top four lines, they need to get the win. Because again, you need to take care of your home court. Like, I mean, we thought Virginia was a 1 seed as recently as last week prior to these 2 losses. And the one thing about 1 seeds is that the 4 of them collectively lose probably less than 4 games total at home. So yes, very important. But what's also important is this upcoming game at Florida State. Virginia only has, to date, 1 true road win. Now, they do have the neutral floor wins. They have the real nice win against West Virginia. But in true road games, they've lost to Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, and George Washington. Out of those 3, GW is probably a tournament team, but the other 2 aren't looking like they really are. So they need to go out there to Florida State, and I think they need to win that one.
Well, a couple of the games that are coming up this week, John, let me throw a few of the games out there just so your thoughts on them. Wednesday night, Wake is at Virginia Tech. Thursday night, Pitt at Louisville. And Saturday, a big one, Notre Dame at Duke. 2 teams we haven't discussed yet tonight, both Notre Dame and Duke. Your thoughts?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you for a moment because we have a nice fishing excursion in progress on the Monmouth bench right now.
Okay, yeah.
I promised we would get some score and bench updates. So the Hawks currently leading 71-64, and looks like they caught a big one right now.
Okay. But David, do you have any thoughts about the rest of the ACC before I know we do want to move on to some of these other conferences?
Notre Dame, I really felt good about them coming into the year. They've actually kind of been disappointing. I think Duke is going to be fine. They're just not quite 1 seed level team that I thought that they were. But other than that, I mean, yeah, Florida State is – we talked about how Virginia goes in there. I must say I'm a little disappointed in them. They've lost 3 straight games. They were a team I was big on for seemingly the 3rd year in a row, thinking that they were going to do big things. You know, they lose at Clemson, North Carolina, and Miami. Now, none of those in and of themselves are damaging, but the fact that they lost all 3 of them when they were already kind of bubblish as it was, they go to NC State, they host Virginia, they go to Louisville. They need to start winning these games if they want to be in the picture.
Did I not tell you in preseason look for the U instead of Florida State?
You did.
You were there. I'll give you that, John. But I just want to throw one other name out here in the ACC, and it's really early to be doing this. Normally, about a couple of weeks from now, we start taking a look at teams that nobody's been talking about that could put together something. I'm keeping half an eye on Virginia Tech right now. Sitting at 10-6, the power rating numbers are not that great. They didn't really beat anybody out of conference. They did have an awful loss to start the season at home against Alabama State, but if we ignore that game or just kind of, go past that game, they have a decent neutral court win against a UAB team that's improving. They have a win over NC State. They have the home win over Virginia now. Big week coming up this week, home against Wake at Georgia Tech. They sweep those 2 games, and this Va Tech team is going to have my attention.
They're much improved.
Go ahead, David.
They're much improved. I don't think they're quite there to the tournament yet, but they are much improved from last year.
I was just going to say, I hope you weren't paying attention to what Virginia Tech did at Duke this weekend because that was not pretty.
I can't ask for them to win a game at Duke. I can't ask anybody almost any year to win a game at Duke. It's just not something you expect from somebody. It's something that I could see a team towards the end of the season saying, hey, if they can win at Duke, this could be what puts them over. But at this point in the season, let's see what happens over the next week. And then next week I may talk a little Vodtech to you, or they can go into and we'll pretend I never said that. So, but
you may never see Joby again at that rate.
Yeah.
Let's head back over to the Pac-12. We did discuss Arizona at the top of the show, but wanted to mention a couple other teams here, notably the Oregon schools, which are both starting to look pretty good here. David, your thoughts on those two teams?
Oregon needs to win a road game. Before I can really think that they're solid. I mean, they've lost at Boise, they've lost at Oregon State rather badly. They did have the win in Birmingham, and they do deserve credit for that. But when you say good, I still think that their profile is very 10-11 line-ish right now until they can at least win a road game now.
How about beating Navy on a Navy base in Hawaii? Is that not a road game?
No. Okay. We're not going. I mean, but again, they have two big ones coming up. If they can get one of the next two, I think it changes the complexion of their profile.
John, what about this Colorado team here? I know David's been high on them this year.
Colorado team.
Is there anything there now that they've lost 3 out of 4 games?
I know David is high on the Front Range teams, and I know he's probably getting the wrong impression whenever he hears the word high, but really what has Colorado done outside of Auburn, Colorado State, BYU, and Stanford? They're nice wins, but they're not against wins that are solidly in the NCAA field.
Let's see.
Well, we're going to have an interesting test coming up this week. Both Oregon schools are in Utah and Colorado, so Colorado will get Oregon and Oregon State at home. Probably need both those games if they want to get into my radar at least.
Yeah, they really do. And then I think they need 3 of the next 4 because they go to the Washington schools. Colorado, I liked how they played in their opener against Iowa State, even though they lost. They wheeled off, I think it was 10 or 11 or however many wins it was in a row after that. Went to SMU down in – I thought they played really well in that game in Las Vegas. And then I think they got stoned on their way out to Cal and Stanford.
That could be it. One of the game with no coming up Wednesday night here is the USC-UCLA game. One of the most relevant USC-UCLA basketball games I think we've had in a while here.
Yeah, I think it's the best that USC has done since they had O.J. Mayo on their team about 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah, now USC went to the bakery for a lot of their out-of-conference games. You're talking, Santa Barbara, Idaho, Cal Poly, Edwardsville, but they're off to a 3-1 start in conference. They went to Wazoo and won handily. They were right in there with Washington. They actually blew the game, and then they come home and they beat both Arizona schools. I was coming into the year thought that Andy Enfield just wasn't going to happen out there. He was way over his head. I stand corrected. I don't know if USC will get there or not, but I really, really like the way they're playing right now. They do need, and I know you pointed this out about me, but I think to impress me, to impress the committee, but more importantly to impress me, they do need to win some more games on the road. But
now, USC did go on the road to Cal Santa Barbara and won, as opposed to Washington, who actually hosted the Gauchos and actually lost at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got some wins, but I agree with David. The next week here, after the UCLA game, the following week they're at both Oregon schools. I think these next 3 games, they take 2 out of 3. I am all on the board with the USC bandwagon.
Yeah,
they take 2 out of 3, and they're closer to protected speed status, I think.
Yeah, and I'll say this, whether they get there or not, and I realize it'll be disappointing for them if they don't, but this has been a Enfield has done a very good job with this team this year.
Let's move on to the what I think is the best conference in the country, and that's the Big 12. I mean, pretty much every conference game you have seems to be a monster game this season. I guess we should start with the game that happened last Monday night. John, that was a decent little game, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had another one of those games where it didn't quite run as long as Arizona and USC did, but you certainly got your money's worth out of that one with several lead changes taking place.
Yeah, David, have you seen a better game in the last 5 years than that Kansas-Oklahoma triple overtime game?
I was trying to think about it, and I don't think that I have. I think the last game, what year was it? I should know this. Was the Duke-Butler final was one of the best college basketball games I've ever seen. 2010 thing. No, that was more than 5 years ago. Yeah. I have not. I do not think I have. It was. Now, the one thing that it doesn't have that a lot of great games have is that it didn't have the stakes that an NCAA tournament game would have. But at face value, I do. I think it's the best game I've seen in 5 years.
I would make an argument that it may be the best regular season game, non-conference tournament or NCAA tournament game that I may have seen in the last 20 years. Maybe as for my entire life. I mean, that's how good of a game it was. I'd have to really think back. There have been a few, but it is up there in that very small handful. I got to say that having watched that game, I would not be shocked to see Kansas and Oklahoma playing again in the final game of the season.
Yeah, if it were a Duke-Carolina game, we'd be talking about it for another 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I correctly think, and you all incorrectly disagree, that Oklahoma is the number one team. You look at their profile. They beat Villanova away from home. They have the win over Iowa State. Their only loss was a triple overtime loss at Kansas. I just think their body of work is a little better in the sense that their wins are a little better. I think Oklahoma's number one. I understand why they're not, but I do think Oklahoma will win the Big 12. But, wow, what an unbelievable game that was.
Well, coming up this week, Kansas is at West Virginia Tuesday night and then hosting TCU. Oklahoma has their big game Saturday hosting West Virginia. So West Virginia gets both teams this week. It's going to be a tough week for Bobby Huggins' squad. But let's move on to another team here that had their most significant win of the season so far.
Bedlam too. Don't forget that. We've got Bedlam.
And Bedlam. Yeah, in between there, you got Bedlam at Oklahoma State Wednesday night. But Baylor was
too intense. We're not canceling that.
Yeah, we'll see what happens after the game. They may cancel the second of the games this season. But Baylor was a team we were almost ready to write off this year. As of when we did our bracket rundown, they were falling and falling fast. Had not won a single road game. Had played a more or less a cupcake schedule, losing any of the good games, and then they go and they win at Iowa State on Saturday, and probably the most shocking score to me that of the weekend, honestly. Maybe that or St. Mary's is lost, but David, I know you weren't surprised by St. Mary's losing, but how about this Baylor team now?
Well, they took our advice. I mean, we were talking on the podcast on Thursday how they needed a big road win, and then they went out and got them, which just goes to show you need to watch our show.
And John, another team that let me read another one of your comments for today's outline was Texas Tech finally steps up to play big boy basketball. How about this Texas Tech team? Are they going to head in the opposite direction that Baylor's heading?
I don't know if they're going to head in the opposite direction just yet, but they played, in my opinion, the number 1 and number 3 teams in the conference who are all protected seed good, but at some point they're going to have to probably finish somewhere around 500 or 8-10 to really stay in consideration this year.
Well, when you've
I want to go back to Baylor for a moment. Okay. I also wanted to add a note that they're the only team in the past 2 years that's won at Iowa State, which is one of the more difficult places to play in the country.
Yeah. On this Texas Tech thing, you've got to play Iowa State twice, Kansas twice, Baylor twice, Oklahoma twice, West Virginia twice. David, where are they going to pick up these wins? They got Kansas State this week. That may be one. It's on the road. They lose that game. I know I was the Texas Tech champion a couple weeks ago, but I don't know where they're going to get the wins to get to 500 or even to what is it, to 8-10 in conference.
Yeah, and it's a good point, and it raises the question similarly to Louisville. Now, unlike Louisville, I don't think Texas Tech was expecting to contend for the NCAA tournament, but Did they do? They essentially, with the schedule they played, put way more pressure on themselves to do well in conference because, other than Little Rock, I'm not seeing anything here.
A home win against Richmond, a home win against Texas in conference play already, home win against Hawaii that may actually get a little bit of credit there.
South Dakota State.
South Dakota State, yeah. I mean, they actually beat some teams that are good under the radar teams, but
they beat them all at home.
All at home.
Yeah.
They've got one more road game left, non-conference at Arkansas, but Arkansas is awful this year.
Yeah.
But
well, they look awful, but they've been a lot more competitive than you can give them credit for.
Yeah.
We also, going back to Iowa State very briefly, I just want to touch on their game coming up Tuesday night here. They're at Texas, and the Longhorns lost at home to TCU. Isn't there a Surgeon General warning about that?
There is, and that is damaging in so many ways. When you're on the bubble and you lose at home to a sub-NIT team, it's not a good thing.
But Texas is schizophrenic enough that they might wind up beating Baylor instead.
Yeah, but looking at this Texas profile now, that they've got the wins over North Carolina, over well, maybe that's all they really have at this point, though, is the win over North Carolina. How good is Washington really? How good is Texas Arlington? How good is Kansas State? We don't know. And they're 9-6, only 3 games over 500.
You're shortchanging their win over Texas Arlington. I mean, we can't have that on this show.
Yeah.
But let's move on to another conference, the other conference that plays the full double round robin, just like the Big 12 does, and that's the Big East. And John, how good is this Villanova team really? Do we know that answer yet?
I mean, if we don't know the answer now, when are we going to know? Oh, wait, that's right. We'll know in the March when the NCAA tournament is scheduled.
They lose in the second round again. Yeah, maybe that's true. But are we looking at a 1 seed here?
Oh, definitely. They'll be looking at a 1 seed from the Big East, whether it's from Villanova or Xavier once they become completely healthy again.
Well, Villanova now 4-0 in conference, having beaten Xavier at home, Seton Hall at home, and Butler on the road. 3 teams that we've talked about as tournament teams for this conference, David.
Yeah, the win at Butler was pretty impressive because, I mean, Butler came back to make it close at the end, but that was a monster road win. I think it's their best one of the season so far. As far as just the overall value of the win. They also, again, and this might not be 1 seed relevant, but it is pretty solid. They're one of 2 teams that have won at Creighton. Creighton not very good overall, but it's still a snake pit. Really, most teams in this conference are, with the exception of maybe the Johnnies and DePaul. Road wins are really tough to come by. And yeah, I mean, if they can win, 15, 16 conference games, I think they will be a 1 seed. I think anybody, Xavier, Butler can't do it anymore, but anybody that wins 15 games or more in this league is probably looking at the 1 or 2 line.
Creighton is also a dangerous team away from home, though. They did pick up a nice win at
John, I wanted to throw that over to you here. This Creighton team, 12-5 overall, 3-1 in conference, KenPom rating of 40. They lost a bad game at Loyola Chicago. Their other losses are not bad at all. Indiana, Oklahoma, Villanova, and Arizona State. Now wins over Georgetown, Seton Hall. Is the Creighton a team that we've been sleeping on all season that can make some noise here?
I think part of the problem with Creighton was how badly they lost earlier in the year against Indiana and Oklahoma. But I had mentioned this during the preview earlier in the year. How many road wins are they going to get that are significant? They've already gotten 1 against the top half of the Big East.
Yeah.
If they can get 1 or 2 more, I think they will be in serious NCAA consideration.
But let's say they hold serve against the teams they should beat, and they get a win at Butler or at Xavier. David, I mean, could this Creighton team be a team that we're talking about in March?
I think so, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I had not paid the slightest bit of attention to them. I watched them play against Indiana. They did not look good. Watched them play against Nebraska a little bit. But, I mean, Seton Hall was a team I was big on. And, Seton Hall had been playing really well. Coming into that game, in fact, it is Seton Hall's only home loss. And Creighton didn't just win it. They won it big. Winners of 5 of their last 6. They host Providence this week, and then they go to DePaul, and then they host Butler, and then they go to Georgetown. I mean, these are all suddenly looking like winnable games.
John, is there anybody else in the Big East that we want to specifically mention? I know it's kind of a light week for Xavier, and for it was a light week for Xavier for Providence. Anything else that you're looking at here?
Well, they had a light week last week, since they only had the game at St. John's, in which they looked a little bit lackluster for the first time since the Northern Kentucky game, and Providence wound up losing a tough one at home to Marquette. The Eagles are another team that we also have to take a closer look at, because they're also going to have a big game at home against Xavier on Saturday, which, depending on his health, may or may not be the game where Edmund Sumner finally makes his return. I don't think he's going to be playing tomorrow night against DePaul.
David, this Providence team also here, very quiet. Well, I guess they lost the game to Marquette, actually. I'm sorry, let me go back on that. They lost the game to Marquette. They've got games at Creighton and home against Seton Hall. The Friars, are they in any trouble from that game? Do you think Marquette's better than we thought they were, or do you think it was
I think Marquette had a really good night, and Providence had a really bad one. I mean, things like that happen. Providence, in my opinion, up until that point, had looked as impressive as anyone in the conference. They had the win against Butler. They also had the wins against Michigan State away from home. One at Rhode Island, not the easiest place to win. And who else did they beat? Somebody else that was really tough. Oh, Arizona. So, I was really, really big on this Providence team. I don't think that they're going to get the wins that they need, or as many of them, to end up on the 1 line like I thought that they might. But, I still think that they're a protected seed caliber team.
Well, if we're talking potential 1-line teams, I think there's 2 Big Ten teams we need to mention, Michigan State and Maryland. Denzel Valentine, back for Michigan State. They completely blasted some team from the state of Pennsylvania that apparently is in the Big Ten. Revenge game coming up this week at home against Iowa, though, for their only loss. John, your thoughts on this Michigan State team and the way they're playing?
Yeah, they looked very impressive in State College on Sunday, and they're going to have a tough game against Iowa, but they also have an even bigger game coming up this weekend when they play Maryland to see who's going to be top dog in the Big Ten at the moment.
That Maryland game is until January 23rd, actually, but they play Wisconsin this weekend. But 2 weeks from now, yes, they do have a huge game coming up with Maryland.
Right. I'm not as sold on Maryland as some of you are, at least not yet. Now, when I say that, I definitely think that they're good. I definitely think protected seed. I don't think they're 1 or 2 seed. And, again, what is their best win, would you say, so far? Who is it?
Maryland's best win, is it the game against UConn? Is it the game at Wisconsin? Is it the game against Georgia? Yeah, I agree with you. They don't have that great win. However, at Michigan, home against Ohio State, they've got at Michigan State, they've got Iowa coming up. The next 2.5 weeks at Ohio State twice, home and road before the end of January. They have a chance to really build out this resume. And here's one to circle on your calendars, everybody. Tuesday, February 9th, Maryland hosting Bowie State.
Not sure about that. Yeah, February 9th, got it. But I think this game coming up this weekend at Michigan is a really big win. Michigan, they've kind of let us down a little bit. I don't think they were quite as good as we thought they would be. But still, they have only 1 home loss, and it was to Xavier, who we're talking about being a 2 seed or maybe even better than that. So they are a very tough team to beat at home. It should be all sold out. It should be a hostile environment. And if Maryland gets this, it would be their best win to date. I think we're going to learn a lot about Maryland this weekend.
Now, Michigan had another injury issue as it related to Karis LeVert. I don't think he played against Purdue, and as you could tell by the final score of that one, that was a big loss for the Wolverines without LeVert's production.
Yeah, he did not. He did not play in that game. But as far as Purdue goes, and John's the other team I wanted to bring up, they get that win over Michigan, but sandwiched in between a home loss to Iowa and a road loss to Illinois. Is the Purdue team in a little bit of trouble here, especially that 84-70 loss at Illinois?
Yeah, that's another one of those games that the Surgeon General would put a warning on there. But right now, from an eye test standpoint, I think it's fair to ask as to whether Indiana's better than Purdue right now, which is something we didn't think we would be saying 2 weeks ago.
Well, if we look at India, Purdue's upcoming schedule, they got Penn State and Rutgers for the next 2 games, and then Ohio State at home. So they've got a chance to build up a couple of wins here. But this Indiana team has now run off, David, 9 straight victories. Should make it 10 this weekend when they were at Minnesota. Have they figured it out?
Maybe. The one thing about Ohio State, I realize that Ohio State's paper isn't that strong, but over the last 3 or 4 weeks, Ohio State had actually looked really good on the court. It was a team that was playing really well, and Indiana blasted them. And the other thing that they did, and they've done this really their last 3 games, their defense has gotten a lot better. It is now been upgraded to mediocre, I think, instead of absolutely god-awful.
But with the offense on this team, all you needed was a mediocre defense. Right. To have a team that, heading into the season, we thought this was a Final Four potential Indiana team based on the talent, the talent of everybody other than the head coach. But
right.
At the rate they're playing, Galen Clavio can probably be coaxed out of retirement to appear on the podcast again.
Yeah.
But let's move on from the Big Ten and take a quick look over the SEC and this Kentucky Wildcat team. And I think we asked it last week. We're going to continue to ask it. I think I'm going to continue to ask it the rest of the season with the losses that they've had now. Was this maybe a vastly overrated team heading into the season?
Well, it's hard to argue that they weren't. I mean, they were ranked number 1 at one point, weren't they? So
and they're. I don't even know that they're a protected seed, or they're very borderline being a top 4 seed right now, with losses at UCLA, that lost to Ohio State, and lost at LSU. We're not really we're talking about 3 losses to bubble teams. We're not talking about losing games to Duke, North Carolina, and Kansas.
Right, and I mean they did have the win against Duke, which is a really good win. They have the home win against Louisville, which who knows how good that one was. But yeah, they went into Alabama and they won convincingly. Alabama, good team at home, especially, and Kentucky went in there and won the way that a protected seed is supposed to win. I still think that this Kentucky team is really good. It wouldn't surprise me if. I still think that they're going to win the SEC. I don't think they're going to run the table. I don't think they're going to win at Kansas. Good Lord, they might get absolutely blown out. But, I don't think that they're I don't think they're on the top 2 or 3 lines even by the time it's over.
And, John, what about this LSU team? After they beat Kentucky at home, they go to Florida and they lose by 6 points to another team that's – a Florida team that really hasn't beaten anybody of note, hasn't had any bad losses. Two teams here, really, this LSU and Florida team, that I don't know that we're sitting here in the middle of January and I don't know what to make of either one of them.
I don't think losing to Florida is going to be that much of a crime, but LSU does need to start racking up some decent wins.
But I would argue losing to Florida is a crime when you've got to make up for losses to Marquette, College of Charleston, and Houston.
They still get chances against Texas A&M and South Carolina, which are also looking better than we had expected in preseason this point.
Yeah, A&M, nice win this weekend. The first team to win at Tennessee, so real nice road win for them.
But to get back to LSU, the only losses that I don't like on their profile would be the NC State and the College of Charleston losses.
But, how much room do you really have in the SEC where you don't have the quality of wins that you could pick up in a Big 12 or a Big East or even in the ACC or the Pac-12 this year? And, David, if you don't have the room, if you're a team like Vanderbilt, 0-3 to start SEC play, what an 8-7 overall, and for a team that was everybody's sleeper.
And they are asleep. Vanderbilt has lost 6 of their last 8, and in that stretch, other than the game against Baylor, I think, which they did lose, they just have not looked good at all. I mean, they went into South Carolina, and who's unbeaten, and they played fairly well, but this is not. They don't look like a tournament team. Their paper certainly doesn't look like it, and they don't look it on the court. And it's surprising. I mean, Kevin Stallings has done a really good job with this program. I mean, they've had some bad years for sure, but are you a little surprised that they're this? I mean, I'm not surprised that they're not as good as everybody else thought. I am surprised that they're nowhere near the tournament right now.
No, yeah, they look like. I mean, they look like they'll be lucky to make the NIT because you got to finish 500 to get there at least.
Yeah.
And if we want to talk about overall records, though, Ole Miss, on the other hand, sitting here at 12-3 overall, coming off a nice home win over Georgia, at LSU and home to Florida this week. John, is this Ole Miss team kind of a team that we've mentioned as, oh yeah, they may be something as well all season? Is this really something here at Ole Miss, or are they going to turn around and just fall flat on their faces?
Well, prior to that point, their best win had been a win up at Memphis, but Ole Miss also kicked off their new on-campus digs with a win over Alabama, so they do have that going for them right now.
And that may give them a huge home court advantage the rest of the way, and they do have home games against Florida, against South Carolina coming up, the rivalry game against Auburn, Vanderbilt at home, and Missouri and Mississippi State at home. But Dave, you think that may be enough to get those home wins, pick up 1 or 2 road wins, and you could be talking about a tournament team here?
Considering how weak their out-of-conference schedule was, I think they might need more than just 1 or 2 home wins. But I'm not that sold on them. I mean, Kentucky absolutely crushed them. I mean, they were and we just got done talking about how we weren't that impressed with them. They had a real nice win at Memphis, if I'm looking at the right. Yeah. I don't know. I think they got a lot of work to do. And again, this game at UCL or at LSU coming up is probably one of the road wins that they need to get.
Well, let's move on from the SEC over to the Atlantic 10. And John, I know you wanted to discuss this VCU team, so let's start right there. You told us already how much you love the St. Louis team, and VCU throttled St. Louis on the road, despite the fact that St. Louis is 6-9 overall with losses to Tennessee Martin and Morehead State, but we won't discuss that. But John, this VCU team, though, are they on their way back, or was this just a quirk of the schedule that they're sitting here at 3-0 in early A10 play?
Well, wins against St. Joe's, and who else did they beat? George Mason and St. Louis. Two of those games are cupcake games, but winning at St. Joe's has never been an easy one in conference play. But other than that, their best win so far this year had been against North Florida and at Middle Tennessee.
But does VCU have the chances here in the A10, David, to do anything short of? I mean, obviously, if they win the conference outright by 2 games, that's one thing. It's kind of like what Davidson did last year. But
right.
Could they finish 2nd or 3rd in the conference with this non-conference resume that did not include any notable wins, really, and make the tournament?
I don't know about 3rd. I think out of the 16 conference games, they need to win at least 12 of them, probably more. If they're 12-4 and they pick up 2 neutral floor wins in the conference tournament, that's probably enough. But really, to be safe, I think they need to go 13-3 and avoid a loss in the core. I think 13-3 gets them there.
But this is 15-3. Right.
Oh, it's 15-3. I'm sorry. They went to 18 game format. 14-4 probably gets them there. But again, this is the A10. It's a good league. It's certainly good enough to get its top first-place team safely inside the bubble, or at least it always has for all but one of the years I can remember. So it's a good league, but it's not quite the Big 12, the Big East. There's not multiple top 25 teams in this league. So simply finishing 2 or 3 games over isn't going to do it. You have to finish 10 over. I think I was saying 13-3. I think they got to finish 10 over and get to 14-4. Approximately to feel safe. And maybe even then they're not safe.
I was going to say 9 times out of 10, the Atlantic 10 is a bubble team's worst nightmare because that's a conference that usually steals a bit on Selection Sunday or thereabouts.
Well, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to say it's the bubble team's worst nightmare if you're in the league, because there's a lot of poison. And if we're talking A10, Dayton, a really good team. I mean, this conference has multiple teams that are, 2 or 3 usually that are inside the bubble or on the bubble, one of the two. It has a couple of NIT teams, but then you have some real poison. And when you're losing to teams like LaSalle and Duquesne, and maybe not Duquesne so much this year, and you really, really hurt yourself. You need to. That's why you need to finish 8, 9, 10 games in front, over 500 in this league.
Well, you mentioned that Dayton game. This past weekend was our Lee Del Vecchio and I went on the Hoops HD road trip to the little Big Five country there. We caught a kind of a doubleheader. First going to Tom Gola Arena for the Dayton LaSalle game, followed by Penn and Princeton at Penn in the Palestra.
And nobody invites the puppet anymore.
We did not invite the puppet. We thought that you were barred from any Big Ten facilities. From any Big Five facilities. Apparently, that's just for Big Five games. So we've got to apologize to you, David.
Okay, thank you.
But Dayton, honestly, having seen them in person in that game, they did not look like a top 25 team. They didn't really look like a tournament team that game. They Scoochie Smith had 3 points. Dyshawn Pierre had 12 points. It was they didn't look like they had any preparation at all for this LaSalle team. And LaSalle's entire theory of trying to beat Dayton here was they thought we're going up against a top 25 team. Dayton was ranked 25 heading into the game. They thought, well, how are we going to have any shot at beating them because we're not a very good team? Let's just slow it down. Every single possession, they ran the shot clock down to 2 seconds left and put up a bad shot that sometimes went in, sometimes didn't. And Dayton couldn't even beat them like that. And if that's all you need to do to beat Dayton, Dayton's not going to win very many more games this season.
And this is against a LaSalle team that would struggle to finish in the top half of the Metro Atlantic this year.
Yeah,
it would not finish in the top half of the Metro Atlantic this year. This is a bad LaSalle team. And Dayton's paper is pretty good when you look at their profile, but when you look at them on the court, sweating out Miami, Ohio at home, who is terrible. Sweating out Arkansas at home, who isn't really that good. Suddenly their win at Vanderbilt isn't looking that good. And then they go and lose to LaSalle. Now, again, trivia, this is where we need people like Kyle Lamb to answer questions like this. But how unusual is it for a team to be inside the bubble with multiple losses to sub-200 teams? I mean, this is a really, really bad loss. Now, it's not so bad that it can't be overcome, but this is a bad loss.
It's a bad loss. If we want to talk bad losses in the A10, the other team that we thought heading into conference play or just less than a month ago was a great team, was a really good team. The George Washington Colonials lose at DePaul, lose at St. Louis. I mean, George Washington should be 15-1 right now, and they're 13-3, and it's inexcusable.
Yeah, St. Louis also a sub-200 team. I didn't realize that. So, I mean, is the yeah? It just
I hate to say we're looking at a one-bid league here, but it's hard for me to say it's more than a two-bid league.
Yeah, and the thing is, Dayton lifted some weight out of conference, as did George Washington. It seems like the teams that actually came into the conference with some meat on their profiles are the ones that are losing to really crap bottom-feeder teams.
And then suddenly Dayton is going to have a very pivotal game at home tomorrow against Davidson, who themselves is in desperate straits right now.
Yeah, I'm not big on Davidson at all this year. I liked them last year. I like their program. I like their coach. This particular year, I don't think they're anywhere close to the tournament. I think Dayton will flatten them tomorrow.
I mean, I'm still keeping an eye on the St. Joe's team. I know they lost at home to VCU. Really blew that game. Should have won it.
Yeah, that was.
They've got a fairly easy stretch coming up here at George Mason, Fordham, a non-conference game against Penn, then both LaSalle and UMass. So St. Joe's has a chance to rack up 5 or 6 more wins in a row here before they get tested at all. I guess it's their January 30th game at Rhode Island's their next big test. If St. Joe's can just win the games that they should win, which is almost every game left in the schedule, given the A10 schedule here, I think the St. Joe's team can make the tournament. but I don't know that both GW and Dayton are going to make it. I think one of them could fall right on out of the field.
I think Dayton is still relatively safe. I think GW needs to really pull themselves out of a tailspin. But the thing about Dayton is that you just can't have another night like that. Oh, my God.
Let's quickly touch on the American Conference. John, Cincinnati now lost 3 out of 5 games, and their only the wins in there were Tulsa and South Florida. How much trouble is this Cincinnati team, and especially with their best win, GW, not looking as good anymore?
If you heard Mick Cronin on his post-game yesterday, you would have thought he was never happier after his team shooting 31% at South Florida, but
oh my God.
still finding a way to pull out the win.
John, I did not hear the quote, but I read the quote. It is an amazing quote. Is there any way we can produce that quote, either in writing or reading it? Essentially, the gist of it was Cincinnati shot 31% at, was it South Florida or
South Florida?
Yeah, South Florida.
It was South Florida. Give me a few moments, David.
Okay, yes, and we're looking for this quote because it is unbelievable. South Florida has won 3 games this year. They are absolutely abysmal. Cincinnati goes in there and wins by 3, has an awful shooting night, and Mick Cronin is ecstatic, and he makes a quote. I'm going to not get it specifically. John's looking for that, but the gist of it was, we're a good, like, if we can have shoot the ball that poorly and still come out with a win, it shows we're a really good team. This is what we're all about.
The funny thing with this Cincinnati team is heading into the season, the beginning of the non-conference season, they were shooting well, and it's something we've never seen out of the Cincinnati team. And David, it's one of the reasons you and I were both really high on this team when they started off the season 7-0, had that GW win, and now they're back to old Cincinnati.
This is what we're all about. 31%, and he said it, meaning it as a compliment. Like, what a backhanded compliment. This is what we're all about. 3-point wins at South Florida. Cincinnati's in a lot of trouble. I can't help, the losses to SMU, Butler, and Iowa State were by a total of, I think, 6 points, and all of them were in the final seconds. And how aggravating is it to be essentially a combined total of 6 points in 30 seconds away from having 3 wins against top 20 teams? But having said that, they did lose to Temple at home, who isn't that strong, although they're playing better, and they have to sweat out South Florida. Wow.
Here we go, David.
Okay,
hard to believe, but it's a thing of beauty for a coach. You see, Coach Mick Cronin said, it's everything you preach. Every time out, you just tell your guys to keep defending, keep boxing out. And it's always a tough game coming to South Florida, Troy Calpain said.
Oh, Lord.
It's, by far our best defensive effort of the season. Yeah, I mean, it's wow. But let's move on here in the,
But real quick, this league, how many teams are landing inside the bubble?
I think there's one solid NCAA tournament caliber team here that is ineligible for the NCAA tournament, and that's SMU team. I think UConn and Cincinnati are both looking bubblish right now, and I don't know that anybody else is. I know Houston has a bloated record, but unlike John, I think that they are not very good at all. I think they're going to come back down to earth here. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to be UConn Cincinnati unless Memphis can get red hot and do something. That's the only other team that I think has a shot here, and they're still a long way away from that.
Now, if Houston wins at Cincinnati this week, it's another story for the Cougars.
I think it's more of a Cincinnati story still. I think if Houston gets to 6-0 conference by beating UConn and SMU also over the next week, then I'll be on the Houston bandwagon. But until then. Actually, this is a huge week for Houston. The next 3 games at Cincinnati, home to UConn, at SMU. They go 2-1 in that. I'll pay attention to them.
Yeah, but it's UConn though. That's an easy game for them.
They've won that home game against UConn 3 or 4 years in a row now. I think that's no matter how bad they were. Very quickly, the Mountain West. We touched on the UNLV story already. David, is this just a one-bid league? Even if Boise State wins the conference and falls in the conference tournament, is it still a one-bid league?
Unless Boise wins out, or only loses one game. Yeah, I think it is a one-bid league.
I mean, Boise is red hot, has won 9 in a row. The only thing we think good we can say about anybody in the Mountain West right now is that, I think.
Yeah.
Wichita State started to look a little bit better too, John.
Yeah, they did get a nice win at home over Evansville midweek, and also exposed Southern Illinois for the fraud they were. So that was a nice win for Wichita to really separate themselves from the pack in the Missouri Valley.
David, you and I have spoken under the radar about Southern Illinois. We both called them frauds. 83-58, they get clobbered at home by Wichita.
Yeah, and they got clobbered in a home game that was really kind of their showcase. They had this electricity, they had this momentum built up, and Wichita just went in and curb stomped them. It got so bad I changed the channel.
I think in reference to my St. Louis friends, I'm going to have to downgrade them to SIU Carbondale after that showing.
Right. But looking at Wichita, since being at full strength, they've lost just one game at Seton Hall, a very close game. They failed to beat New Mexico State. That was disappointing.
Yeah, that is a game that got canceled. They are still trying to reschedule that, but it is not officially back on the calendar yet. I think it would be important for them to reschedule it. New Mexico State, second or third best team in the WAC after the Lopes, so could it help their power number ratings a little bit actually if they can get that game back rescheduled. Last I've heard, they are still trying to work on a date with New Mexico State for that game. John, over in the West Coast Conference, Gonzaga Bulldogs, now back in the top 25 in both polls. Do you think they actually belong there?
In the polls, it's kind of borderline between Gonzaga and Southern California. But as long as they're undefeated in the West Coast Conference, I can give them some top 25 love. It's a little more than I can say for St. Mary's after dropping one to Pepperdine this weekend.
Yeah, but David, Gonzaga, they have a win over UConn, and that's it. I mean,
I wouldn't.
Where's the meat on this resume? They're going to pick up tons of wins, but that's it.
Yeah, well, the top 25 isn't about meat, really. It's about when your most recent loss was, and I think they're going to continue to move up by default because as teams in the teens play other teams in the teens and lose, teams like Gonzaga will continue to play teams outside the top 50 and win, and they'll kind of move up by default. I think the polls are more about how many games have you lost and when was your most recent loss, as much as they're about actually beating good teams. And we see it all the time, especially in teams that are sort of on the under-the-radar conferences like Gonzaga. Remember the year Murray State was inside the bubble and in the rankings and on the 6th line? They finished the season ranked number 6.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking about this Gonzaga team. We've seen years with them getting 1s and 2 seeds, but we've also seen years going back with the Zags as well, where they were top 12, top 15 team and ended up with a 7 seed, 8 seed.
Yes.
I see this Gonzaga team, if they can run through the majority of the rest of their schedule. I know they got a game at SMU still, a non-conference game. If they run through the majority of the rest of their schedule without any more than another 1 or 2 losses, I could see them being top 12, top 15 in the nation in the polls, and sitting on the 7, 8, 9 line.
Well, yeah, there's a decent chance that SMU will still be undefeated once Gonzaga and SMU play.
And we've seen it before. We saw it with some of those Butler teams in the Horizon League. I think, well, they did get on the 5 line one year, but fair or not, and I would argue that it is because we've also seen Gonzaga get seeded 1st and 2nd when they scheduled hard out of conference and won. I think it is fair, but really, say they end up on the 8 or the 9 line, they will not have beaten anyone seeded better than them.
Well, even if they beat SMU, they'll not beat anybody seeded better than them. Yeah. They do eventually have a big game cut up Thursday night, their home game against BYU. Kind of turning into a rivalry there. Hopefully BYU stays in the West Coast Conference. We're going to find that out in the next week or so because as football is deciding whether or not they're going to allow the Big 12 to have a championship game with less than 12 members. Looks like they will, but if they don't, the Big 12 says they will expand by 2 more teams to get the championship game. And I would think BYU would be a serious consideration there.
Really? One of the things about BYU, they are logistically tough for not just, football, it's not an issue, but for other sports because of the whole Sunday thing. Aren't they 1,000 miles from the closest Big 12 school?
Well, it's another TV market.
Well, true.
And I think that's more important these days than how far you are, as we've seen with some of the expansions in.
Wow. Who else would they? This is kind of news. I didn't really think the Big 12 was looking to expand.
Well, it looks like they're going to deregulate conference championships games. I think that the deal is going to be that that you can have a conference championship game with less than 12 teams in your conference, as long as you play a full round robin. You don't have to have divisions. Otherwise, you will have to have divisions for football if you don't do a full round robin, which was because the ACC was talking about doing a 3-division thing, getting very footballish. It's very technical here.
Right,
but I don't want to go too far off base. But more or less.
But if they do it,
the Big 12 says
if they do. Okay.
Yeah, if the proposal gets voted down and there is no deregulation of the conference championship games, the Big 12 has pretty much says that they will look to expand by 2 more teams.
Wow.
Yeah, what I was going to say was if they do decide to expand and go westward, they'd probably also add Colorado State as a bridge to get BYU a travel partner and also get the Denver TV market back.
No, the other team I've heard is the likes of a Cincinnati or so. Actually, get somebody else out of the American, but that's very much speculation at this point. It doesn't look like it's going to be an issue, at least for now. Maybe realignment comes again at some point. I'm sure it will.
What about Missouri?
What about them?
Well, that's what
but on that note, I want to run through
Missouri rivalry.
Each of you. Any other final thoughts or any other comments about this past week and what's upcoming? David.
Well, I think I'm all for Big 12 expansion, and I think they need to look at inviting Missouri. I think they would be a great. I could see Kansas and Missouri turning into a fantastic rivalry.
Really?
Yes, I think it would.
Well, but now on the other hand, maybe they should invite BYU and Utah because they would be a good rivalry too.
Oh, that would be. Yeah. So why don't they invite those 3?
Okay.
Or Pitt. Invite 4, and then we'll just have 14 teams. We'll have West Virginia, Pitt, BYU, Utah, and Missouri and Kansas.
John, any final thoughts?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's going to be on a slightly more somber note as it relates to Andrew Smith and Butler. If you hadn't heard the news, Brad Stevens had taken a game off from coaching the Celtics to visit Smith in Indianapolis because apparently, I guess his, leukemia or whatever he has been diagnosed as far more terminal. And Samantha Smith, Andrew's wife, had been posting on her blog that it's starting to get much more critical by the day. So definitely our thoughts and prayers are with Andrew Smith, his family, and the Butler community.
Yeah, I've got to echo what you just said completely here. I mean, our thoughts and prayers definitely out to the Smith family. And all their friends. It's horrible to lose somebody that young to disease like that. But on that note, I guess we do want to wish everybody a good evening here, and we'll go and end our megacast now. You can tune into one of the other ESPN networks for the rest of the information about this college football championship game. But we'll talk to you again real soon.